Today I'm going to be sharing some of the experience from Romanian women who have spent time in prostitution in Switzerland. These women were not necessarily classified as trafficking victims. Some have entered prostitution legally, believing they're making a choice. But what they have lived in Switzerland shows clearly that legalization does not protect women, and it may, to the opposite, expose them. Their testimonies would relive a few common realities I'm going to share with you in the next minutes. And something that is very important, the connection between also prostitution and drugs. First of all, just to give you a little introduction of our organization. We're an organization based in Bucharest and in Brașov, and we're working doing outreaches in approximately 7 cities in Romania. We have a drop-in center in Bucharest where about 50 people come every week. Some of them are the children of our beneficiaries who also benefits from some of our activities. We have a long-term shelter in Brașov where we can also receive moms with their children. We have emergency housing operated through the connection with a hotel company. We also have transitional housing for women exiting our program here in Brașov, our long-term housing, as well in Bucharest as in Brașov. And next to that, we also do some prevention and awareness activities. And I'm very happy to share today some of the conclusion we have after discussing and interviewing a few women who have been into Switzerland. First of all, I would like to clarify, why do Romanian women go to Switzerland? And so from the interviews I had, women go because obviously they're desperate for money. Financial means is the main motivator for them to go. Some of them have been talking about supporting their children or escaping poverty. Others have been trying to pay debts or medical expenses for expensive treatments. Some of them have been coming out of trauma, orphanages, unstable families. And for some of them, Switzerland was actually the first experience into prostitution, and for some of them, the only experience in prostitution. And that's also maybe important to highlight, because some of the women that I've been talking to have shown great trauma after their experience doing prostitution in Switzerland, being the only experience they had. And some of them, after their experience in Switzerland, have decided to completely finish this chapter of their lives and move on doing something very different. So the women come because often they've been promised easy money. Some of them have been talking of very high salaries that seem quite impossible for Romania, like 4,000 euros a month, or you're going to make money and you're going to be able to buy a house in a few months, or maybe for those who are a bit more realistic, in a few years. Often the recruitment has happened through a boyfriend, through an acquaintance, or through other women who also may have been in prostitution already in Switzerland. And it seems that all of those people benefit from being the middle person, sending those women into prostitution and get a commission, whether it's with a legal brothel or studios, or whether it's also in other contexts. Now I'd like to share my second point, the abusive context, and talking about pimps and middle people. Behind legal prostitution, we see that there is also hidden criminal structure. A lot of them have been sharing having lover boyfriends who have pushed them and organized them for them to go to Switzerland to work in prostitution. And some of those have been talking with clubs, and so have connections with the clubs. Some of them have been pushing their girlfriends to go directly on the streets working. In particular, we had a woman sharing she'd work in Zurich in the streets doing prostitution. Women talk about being pressured, threatened, pushed to comply. talk about long working hours with little rest, and also have talked about experiencing intimidation, conflicts, and also violence in certain cases. In particular, one woman would oppose to the pressure that was put on them, even by local studios or brothels, saying they didn't want to comply to the sexual acts. They had their boundaries, their limits, and so in order to push them away, or maybe for them to leave, or to pressure them, then different people would have been used to put pressure on them, and sometimes also women who would have get into conflicts with them that could even had violent outcomes. What they've been sharing is everyone around them is making money from her, the boyfriend, the middle person, the studio, the websites. And so what we see is legality does not remove pimping, it just makes it less visible. Now I want to talk about some experiences they had of abuse, some of them directly from brothel owners or studios. They've talked, first of all, of very high prices of renting the rooms in the studios, and 170 francs a day was the price they've shared. A lot of them talk about half commissions for clients. They talked about having forced schedules, many hours of work, the obligation to accept every client, the pressure to provide all services listed online. One was sharing about the fact they made her sign when she arrived that she would do all those sexual acts that were on the website, though she didn't want to do them. She felt pressure in order to accept the job, to sign that document, and then they got in conflict when she actually realized that she felt very uncomfortable doing a lot of those, and she refused, and then some conflicts arise. Some issues also with photographies that were put on the websites and that were not taken out. One of the women shared how she felt vulnerable, not so much about what she had decided to do, like selling her body, but she felt very vulnerable when she actually decided to quit, seeing that the website and the studio was advertising her own photographies, and saying that she felt very powerless. She was not in her country, she didn't know the law, she didn't know who to call for. She shared feeling stupid, that okay, I accepted this, and who is going to believe me, and who is going to think, okay, it's not normal that my pictures are still being used. And so she felt very powerless, and had to do a lot of pressure towards the studio in order for her pictures to finally be taken off the website. They talked about also being under video surveillance. A lot of them talk about having to sleep in the places they work, serving clients, maybe a dozen of clients each day, sleeping in that same bed and feeling uncomfortable with it. Also, an NGO worker who does outreach talked also about seeing very crowded bedrooms that had up to maybe 10 or a dozen of beds for girls. And in her words, saying that the women were being treated like animals, and feeling that they didn't have dignity in the way they were being housed. And also some of the girls talked about being forced to take the morning after pill without medical supervision after having unprotected sexual intercourses, and feeling pressure to take that even if they wouldn't see a doctor. Many studios were described like having just one simple rule: you cannot refuse a client. The client is king, you do whatever the client wants, and a feeling that they are not fully humans, like the client is seen in a very high position. You need to do everything he wants, you cannot upset him. And a lot of them said, okay, what about me? What about my dignity? What about my health? Why is nobody caring about how I feel about all of that? Another topic that was brought up was the topic of drugs and prostitution, said to be very linked together. saying that a lot of clients would use very big amounts of drugs or alcohol, seeking adrenaline and an escape. And one of the women specifically said she believed that the studios were actually a facade for drug use, and the men will go specifically not just for the sexual acts, but also because they knew they could find drugs there. And saying that they felt a lot of pressure to use drugs because clients would take lots of drugs and think it's more fun to be with somebody who also takes them, and so they felt very often pressured to take drugs and also alcohol. They talked about one of the girls in particular who was already addicted to drugs, how she was forced into alcohol, and after leaving prostitution in Switzerland, she had to go to detox and had to deal with her alcoholism that was a consequence of her working in the brothel. They talk also about the fact that middle people or the people supervising felt also good that they would use drugs because they would be more easily controlled, manipulated, emotionally numb, and so they were encouraged to take substances in order to deal with what was happening there. Another topic that was raised was abuse from clients. They talked about the fact that the woman felt degraded, unsafe. They say, I could only count on myself. I felt very alone. I felt nobody had my back and I had to survive here. They talked also about verbal insults, physical aggression, demanded for unprotected acts or degrading acts or dangerous acts, and the fact that they were forced to comply, saying that okay, if the client would say I paid, you have to do everything. And they say sometimes they got into conflict because they had misunderstood what the client was asking for, and once he had paid, he was very angry and upset because they wouldn't do certain things they didn't think they had agreed on, or maybe they hadn't. But it looks like the barrier of the language also makes it more difficult for them to have clear boundaries. And so they would talk about some of them feeling forced. They had to kiss clients and do certain acts they believe were degrading for them, and that work was crossing a boundary for them. And they talked about if a client complained, then the studio would punish her. I want to finish talking a bit about the physiological impact. A lot of the women, once exiting this experience, have lived consequences like trauma, anxiety, talked about shame, loss of self-worth, nightmares, dissociation, alcohol. Many returning home with no savings. Some had debts. Some said, I came with pocket money, I went back with pocket money, nothing more. So it seemed like, at least for the ones who only worked there for a few months, maybe up to 6 months, they couldn't manage to get to know the system in order to make it money worth for them, and all of them came back home with almost no money. But in exchange, they had emotional and psychological wounds. Some said they are still going through therapy, and some of them are still struggling to rebuild their lives. Different victims with who I tried to have an interview said they would not talk about it, that it was a closed chapter and they didn't want to go back to it because it was very traumatizing. I just want also to underline one important thing, and it's about name calling. Though legalization can to a certain point make women feel they're safer if they're working legally in brothels, though we see from those interviews that not all of the women who were interviewed and worked in Switzerland in prostitution were hired in legal brothels, and still there is illegal prostitution happening on the streets, but also mentioned in hotel rooms without being registered. One of them in particular said that she found it really hard psychologically to have pressure to do paperwork that would name her as a prostitute. And she says, I've done a lot of things in my life, but I refuse to have the name escort or prostitute put on a certificate, on a paper with my name. That's something that's too much, too heavy for me to bear. And I think that's very important also to realize this aspect of labeling people on paper, even though we see that, okay, maybe it's bringing more safety. At the conclusion, I want to state that even in legal system, prostitution is harmful, exposes vulnerable women to hidden pimping, abusive brothel system, violent clients, drug-related exploitation, long-term psychological trauma. I believe legalization has not made prostitution safe. It's only made the exploitation harder to see. And I hope together we can work against that. Thank you very much for this time and for giving those women a voice.